blue blink. Excellent. Peter has served as the executive director for Bethany Kids, and I believe we're going to hear about that today. Alongside the rest of the team, he seeks to increase access to appropriate medical care for children across Africa. He's leading a strategic expansion of Bethany Kids into new regions and new countries. Peter has lived in North America, Europe, the Middle East, and he's been to over some 85 countries. Is that correct? Over the years, he has worked in communications as a school teacher, as a pastor for one of the largest social services providers in Canada. He has a master's in theological studies, an MA in social justice and community development, as well as a graduate certificate in teaching and nonprofit management. He now works for, as I mentioned, Bethany Kids because he believes their model to be the best way to provide immediate and sustainable transformation to communities across Africa. With all that having been said, I'm proud to have introduced you. Thank you.
It really is a joy to be here. And this is my second Rotary group in Brockville in the last couple weeks. I think at least one of you have already heard my speech. So hopefully second time's a charm. As was just said, I am absolutely thrilled to be working with Bethany Kids. I do believe it to be one of the very best ways for us to see lives, families, children just transformed on the continent of Africa, because it begins by focusing on medical care, which is something that, even as you heard about the hiking accident, can absolutely derail an entire family's system. And if you don't have free health care and you don't have the ability to get surgery when you need it, and your whole world can fall apart. So I wanted to share a little bit with you about the work of Bethany Kids, and then to be fully transparent, I would love for someone in this room to say, this sounds like a great opportunity. I'm just sending you a check now for $10,000, and then that's all. That would be a great finish to the speech. So if you think that might be you, if you would just get started with that. I don't want to delay you any longer. So first of all, let me just say that Bethany Kids, the way our model begins and starts is by training new pediatric surgeons. And that is a response to a significant deficit in quality pediatric surgeons who serve on the continent of Africa. When we started this training program, there were few to no surgeons anywhere between sort of Cairo and Cape Town. There's almost no pediatric surgeons between there, particularly surgeons that come from the continent of Africa. We've often had foreigners and other international folks like myself coming in and out of the continent, but actually having people who live in their home countries, who speak the local language as pediatric surgeons, is a significant deficit. In fact, in many of the places where we have trained new surgeons, those surgeons are the only pediatric surgeons for the entire country and still are to this day. So this is something that is a significant issue, that is access to quality surgery. And so we have been fixing that situation, if you can say it in those terms, by training new surgeons. So that's the first kind of phase of our work. And then over the years, we've discovered that just having a surgeon who is from a country is not enough, because frequently the hospitals are not willing to pay a fair salary to these surgeons. So even though they're the only pediatric surgeon in the country, having a hospital willing to fund their position has become very difficult. And so sometimes that allows or encourages people to sort of say, well, listen, I need to feed my family, so I'm going to move to Canada, I'm going to move to the UK. And that would not help us achieve our goal of seeing children within Africa find healing. So early on, we decided to begin paying part of the salary of each of these surgeons who graduate. So we not only train new surgeons, but we also support their salaries once they leave us, so that when they go home, they don't have to make a decision between their family and the families of the children they serve, but they can be properly compensated and spend their time saving lives in their community. And so every year, as you can imagine, that means our work grows significantly as new graduates go into the workforce, and we continue to sponsor more and more surgeons. In addition to that, what we discovered early on was that many of the children who come to see us, even though our surgeons are working for very little, the hospital has, there's fees for diagnostic testing and blood work and all of this. And so those were barriers for some of the children who came to see us. And so we decided that a core value for us would be that any child who comes to our family, if they can't afford care, can pay their hospital bills. So a significant portion of our budget every year is just paying the hospital bills for kids who come to see our surgeon and cannot afford the hospital bills. The last thing I would add in terms of how we work is, you could say, kind of holistic care, because beyond surgery, the realization is that, there are other factors involved in a child who's facing surgery. Many of these children come to us with profound disabilities, and so there's social stigma and sort of exclusion and not being invited to activities within their hometowns. There's sort of emotional, psychosocial, spiritual, all of it is part of a child being well. We also know that without good rehab, that includes wheelchairs, these children are not always going to have the best chance at success. So we started providing wheelchairs, free rehab, so that occupational therapy and physiotherapy is being provided to these children. So the work has grown, as you can imagine, starting with this vision to say we want to get the best surgeons in the field. And then when we support those surgeons and their vision for their home communities, tremendous things happen. So much so that last year we did about 4,000 surgeries for children in low resource centers. And that pushes us well past the 40,000 mark since we started. So this is growing rapidly. 9 new trainees in training right now, so that'll be 9 new pediatric surgeons that will graduate from our program in the next couple of years. Growing rapidly, many children are finding healing, and what that means is that when you can take care of the child, the whole family is transformed. Because in the past, we would see that families would sometimes sacrifice their jobs, their careers, the little capital that they had, whether it be a farm animal or a home, in order to try to get medical care. And now we're able to stop that from happening and allow the family to take care of themselves and get back on their feet. So incredible things happening. And as I say, my job, I'm not a surgeon. I'm not the one providing the care. As I said at the beginning, we train and resource African surgeons to work on the continent of Africa. So my job is to go around to community centers and Rotary clubs and basically just beg for money. So sometimes we've done that in homes, and I feel like I'm selling Tupperware or something, as we invite people over for wine and cheese, and they stuff their bags full of brochures or something. But I hope you see that I find it such a meaningful work, a work that truly does see lives transformed. I said to someone recently, they said, how's it going? I said, I'm aware that lives hang in the balance with this work. If I can raise money, that means lives are transformed, lives are saved. And so I'm excited to come to groups like yourselves to ask for money, to tell you our story. And it's also always difficult because I know that, people are committed, and it's not always easy to squeeze more money. But here we are, we're talking about it. I wanted to share just one human story that I think sums up this work quite well in terms of, you can hear data like 4,000 surgeries, and I can tell you we've given thousands of wheelchairs away in the last few years, but what does that all look at a human level? I would just want to share one personal story, and then I'm hopeful that some of you have questions or large donations you'd like to make or something. So let me share the story of a woman named Francesca. She's a colleague of mine, and she's currently an employee with Bethany Kids. But when she was born, she must be in her 30s at least now. When she was born, she had a medical condition called spina bifida. And as a woman with spina bifida, she was born in the part of Kenya called the Samburu region, not far from the Maasai, if you're familiar with that community. And because she was a person with a visible disability, her family believed her to be a curse. And so their belief system, the taboos around curses, were that they believed that the only way to protect their family was to poison this child and get rid of her. That's how she came into the world. So it's not just, as I said at the beginning, it's not just the physical disability that we're trying to treat. There's a whole community, social, emotional complexity to it. Her mother ran away with her so that she was poisoned, but it was ineffective. Her mother managed to flee the community with her. But even into her teenage years, things were not simple. In her own words, she never had a single day where she was wet, where she wasn't wet, because her bowels, or her bladder, I should say, didn't work the way that many of ours do. So she was constantly leaking. And so that creates stigma, as she goes into, tries to get into schools or the workforce. People see her as a woman with a disability, and they smell her. And that created just a huge number of layers that created significant harm for her. She recounts how in her teenage years, every single member of her family was invited to a wedding except her, because of the way she looked and smelled. And she not only wished that her grandparents had been successful in poisoning her, but she tried to take her own life. That was the depth of difficulty that she was facing. So when she came to us and we were able to provide the surgery and medical care for her, as well as that sort of holistic healing for her whole life was radically transformed. And she began to find hope in herself, among other places, that she mattered, she was worth something, and she should not be excluded. She was valuable just like the rest of us. So her whole world transformed. Now she works at one of our centers as a wonderful staff person. She found a husband, got married, has a baby, like just a beautiful family. And you meet this person, you think, this person's extraordinary. She's making the world a better place. And if it had not been for Bethany Kids, she would not be alive. And so I think about numbers like last year, 4,000 kids getting medical care from us. And I think of how many more Francescas are alive today because of that. And the kind of profound impact they will have on their communities and their countries over the coming years just excites me. And so I invite you, as the Rotary Club, and as individuals who make up this club, I invite you to partner with us to accomplish this great work. We're now in 7 countries, and that grows rapidly, so we could really use your help. Happy to take any questions for you. I get excited about this and can talk about it all day, and you're thinking, yet another guest speaker. But you might have questions, and I want to put that to you. You are eloquent people. I've already heard some wonderful speeches, and I know there's some people in training to become Easter bunnies, so there's a lot of talent in the room. And so I would invite you to give me your questions. Those ones are free. And then after that, maybe there's something else you'd like to give to Bethany Kids. But first, let's start with questions. Any questions you have for me?
Yes, thank you, Peter. Bethany Kids, where'd the name come from?
Good question. So the gentleman who started Bethany Kids, his daughter's name was Bethany. And he had this belief that every single child that comes to us should be treated as if they were our own children. And so that's where that kind of holistic view of kids comes from. It's not, we're just processing papers in hospital, but we are trying to really provide a compassionate love to every child who comes before us as if they were our own kid. And if you had a kid in surgery or a hospital, you would, what was the gentleman from Australia? You would jump off the Himalayas hang gliding to raise money for these kids. So that is where the name comes from. It was his daughter, and he wanted to remind himself and everyone else around that when we treat these kids, we treat them as their own kids.
That's neat. Thank you. Any questions online before I ask here? Okay. Questions? John?
Yes. Does Bethany Kids in Kenya or Africa, whichever areas you go, do you associate with any of the local Rotary clubs? And thereby, that could also bring forward, I think, some opportunities for funding, because what's the program?
Matching grants.
Matching grants program could maybe be a source of funding by working with local club to where you're doing your good work to maybe clubs in Canada or something, or all over the world.
That's good question. I know that in terms of we may well have some of our staff sitting as Rotarians in some of the countries. We work in 7 countries right now across Africa, so it's a good chance that we have some connections on the ground in some of those places. You might know where all the Rotary clubs are, so let me list off the places we work: Cameroon, Sierra Leone, Uganda, Ethiopia, Kenya, Madagascar, and Zambia. So if you have any friends who are Rotarians in those countries, those are the places we work. What I would say is that historically, we have received support from the Rotary, not so much within those places, but actually I think 2 Rotary clubs in Canada have supported us: Brockville and Kingston, Ontario. So we've had some support from those clubs as well in the past.
Yes, Don?
Yeah.
Is Malcolm Robinson, is he still part of the organization?
He is. He's a saint. If you've ever met Malcolm, he is a humble, gracious, just a beautiful soul. And he worked with Bethany Kids for over 10 years as the executive director. He's now in his early 70s and thought, I should retire. But we convinced him to stay 3 days a week. So that's, I don't know if you call that retirement, but he is our finance manager, and he oversees all of the our bookkeepers, but also making sure all of the money that's raised goes exactly where it needs to go to their various sites. So very much involved, lives in Brockville, Ontario. Some of you might know him as a person in town.
He's been a road
And just
member here.
a tremendous human being. And I would say, when I came to Bethany Kids, one of the things that stood out to me wasn't just the area of the world we were trying to help in, but the way in which we were doing it. And I think I saw profound sense of character and humility from board members to staff members. And I have to guess that probably some of that comes from Malcolm, because he served for so long leading this organization. And so many people have taken on that posture, if I can put it in those terms, to really put others first and be humble. So yeah, I'm sure I could speak all day about how wonderful Malcolm is. So if you know him, say hello to him. But he is just tremendous. And yes, he still works with Bethany Kids.
Larry?
Does all of your fundraising, or all of your budget money, your revenues come from fundraising, or are there any sustainable long-term amounts? And what's approximately your annual budget?
Yeah, good questions. So most of our money, the vast majority, would be foundations and personal donations. So in Canada's, I oversee the work of Canada, the US, and the UK. Canada has a lot of small donors who give very regularly. So people saying, here's $50 a month, I'm committing myself to this work, and that sort of just stacks up and has been really tremendously helpful. In the United States, we get more large foundations, where you're getting one foundation really being a heavyweight in the organization. So there's two foundations in the United States that are really, really significant in that way. Broadly speaking, we have, up until recently, well, I should say we have a budget of about $2 million total for all of our sites. That's 7 African nations, 3 funding nations, all together consolidated budget of about $2 million US. And that is a significant, about 35% increase over last year. So that means I have much to do to raise that difference. Mostly that has to do with sort of significant inflation. We feel the pressure of 8-9% inflation here in Canada, but somewhere like Ethiopia has had double-digit inflation for almost a decade every year. So it is very difficult to provide care in a way that doesn't cost us more every year. So we also, when I started 2 years ago, we were in 5 countries. We're in 7 today, and doing some preliminary work in 2 others. So that's arguably 9 places that are getting some level of support. So it's growing very fast. So we felt that we would rather try to follow the lead of our surgeons in the field and meet their demand, and then just do everything we could on this side of the world to find that money. So that is the phase we're in, trying to get to that 2 million mark for this year. Hopefully I got all your questions. There were a few.
Thank you.
Okay, any more questions? Yes, Ray.
How many surgeons are you currently supporting out in the field?
Yeah, so we support surgeons in 7 different countries. So that would be 7 surgeons right now that get direct support from us financially. And then there are some surgeons who are being trained. And so those trainees, like the 9, are getting sort of a student stipend, as well as their schools being paid for. So there's the 9 in training. And then in the field, we've got 7 who are fully supported right now. 2 who are sort of in some partial support as they set up the local operations in their country. Those would be in Niger and Burundi. So countries that I've not yet mentioned, but we are providing some basic support to those 2. But if you could call our full sense of support, it's about 7 countries. And to speak further to that, we work with every surgeon to figure out what the cost of living is, what the local hospital's paying. But ballpark, we spend about $35,000 US per surgeon in each of those countries. So that's the surgeon salary. And then, of course, the lion's share of our work is spending on hospital bills themselves.
Okay, more questions? Now's the time. Any questions online? No? Okay. All right, Minnie, please.
Great presentation,
Great topic, for sure.
Thank you.
We really appreciate what you had been able to talk to us about the Bethany kids, and certainly it does fit into one of the areas of focus of Rotary, so it's something that we do believe in, we do support. Interesting that you mentioned Madagascar, because about a year ago, the Rotary clubs of our district, about the 6 clubs got together, raised $25,000, which got matched through CEDA, through Canada International Development Agency, which then got matched again by Rotary National, raising a total of $100,000 to build a school in Madagascar with sustainable funding for the next 10 years. And of course, that kind of money for a place like that is quite significant. That's the kind of impact Rotary has in being able to establish these partnerships, raise the funds, and it all starts at the local club within a community that you guys are working in. And engage them and then partner with a club in Canada or the United States, and then start to get these matching grants working and so on and so forth. So these are opportunities we can take a look at for sure in the future. So so thank you very much for coming out and speaking to us today, or online anyways. But we will be recognizing your speech today by donating a book to one of our elementary schools here in our community, with your name associated into it. And of course, it's one of my favorites, Dr. Kitty Cat series. I enjoy reading these on a regular basis to my grandparents. So thank you much for your talk, and this school, going to the school in Wellington Elementary School, to their library in recognition of your speech, and your name will be inside the cover, recognizing that you were here today. Thank you.
50 books a year, but if they're that size, I think we could make it pretty easily. I've got an 18-month-old, so we do a lot of reading of books that size, so I far surpassed the 50 books, but not leadership books or anything of substance. They're like Dr. Kitty Cat or whatever else you just had there.
Peter, thank you ever so much. You're welcome to stay with us until the end of the meeting if you want to, or if you want to say goodbye, that's fine too. So thank you.
Thank you. I will just simply say, again, thank you for the honor of being here, and I don't live too far from you, so if you'd ever like to reach out, have a conversation about this work, I'm always happy to answer more questions and have more conversations. So if you want to email me, peter@bethanykids.org. Happily we'll meet for coffee or something, and we can discuss anything else. And if you have any interest in supporting, as always, would love to hear from you. So please reach out. I'd love to stay in touch with people. And thank you for the work you're doing in Brockville and around the world.
Thank you. Take care. Okay, moving on.